Welcome to the garden. This is a little Rue Anemone. It's a pretty common wildflower here in Minnesota, and it's one of my favorites. You can see those seed pods there. It's about to drop its seeds, so I'll probably transplant this pretty soon because this one's actually on one of my trail systems. I want to transplant it to a much safer location where it's not going to get trampled, because they are actually pretty delicate. You can see those kind of rectangular duck foot shaped leaves and those beautiful little pink to white flowers. They're just one of my favorites. We also get a bunch of these Fleabane. They're kind of a daisy type flower. They're just now starting to open up. You can see that pink coloration. Managed to find a Fleabane that's in flower. The one that's bloomed has beautiful white petals, and these ones have that beautiful pink. Just about to unfurl. I really like these. They remind me of tiny little daisies, but those little petals are just so thin and wispy. They're gorgeous. So anytime I see them on my trails, I try to actually transplant them rather than to pull them or whack them down. Well, this bird really doesn't like me. Sorry, buddy. Here's some more of that Fleabane. They're actually really pretty. You can see they're very fuzzy, and they kind of have these lanceolate shaped leaves. They're lightly serrated here with these teeth, but their teeth are pretty far apart. If we trace them back, they have those same kind of leaves down here at the bottom. So they're pretty tough down here. This one's actually been cut back, and then it forked and shot out 2 new plants. And while we're down here, I just noticed this wild violet. This is a common blue violet. You can tell by the heart-shaped leaves and its smooth texture. I think the fuzzy ones are the yellow violet. A little bit different, but they're very similar. The common blue can be anywhere from white and blue to purple. They have beautiful variations. This is a common blue violet, but look at what's going on with the leaves. They're speckled white. I think this is some kind of disease because they're really delicate, like they've been stripped of their chlorophyll. So I think something's wrong with this plant, but it's actually quite beautiful. The wild violets can look a little bit like these little leaf buttercups. They have that same heart-shaped, but the buttercups have rounder leaves, whereas these violets are much more pointed. So that's really how you can tell them apart if they don't have flowers. The buttercups will shoot up those really tall stalks with those really tiny little yellow flowers. We have one right over here in full bloom. So they're really not the best looking flowers. They're just a little bit too small. these little flowers eventually produce tons of seed. So I do like to do the same thing with dandelions, where I let them flower and then pull them before they produce all their seed. That way they don't just spread all over the place. Kind of looks like a little strawberry, doesn't it? Or a little upside down pineapple. Cute little flowers. So I do like to let them flower. They have those tiny little yellow petals, which I just love. But then, after they've flowered, all the pollinators should have visited. Then I will either pull them or just cut them back. These flowers are a little confusing. They look like those little leaf buttercup. They're almost identical. The seed pods are a little different. They're kind of like spiky little balls instead of individual seeds, like a strawberry. These are more like a star fruit, or what's that spiky fruit? They have like little hooks rather than little round seeds. The leaves are also a little different. You can see that they're heavily lobed. They're a little bit more fuzzy too. They're kind of velvety soft. But they look so similar to those little leaf buttercup. It's really tricky to tell them apart except for the leaves. That really gives them away, I think. Here's a really big one over here. So they look more like the wild geranium than the buttercup. But then they have those buttercup flowers. So kind of an interesting little plant. We have these wild geranium. These are extraordinary plants. We got a little beetle in there right now. Looks like a ladybug, but it's not. I think it's some kind of other beetle. These are another one of my favorite wildflowers. This is a stunning group of those wild geranium. You can tell by the flower and the shape of the leaves. You get those heavily lobed leaves. Always going to have that fuzzy little texture to them and that kind of dappled stained glass pattern. But just look at how thick they fill in here. This is a perfect little spot for them. We also have tons of creeping Charlie, sometimes called ground ivy. This stuff spreads pretty much like a weed. That's these little purple flowers, and they are everywhere. They have a beautiful little dappled pattern on them, kind of a speckling of purple. There's another wild violet. Those are pretty much done flowering for the season. But the creeping Charlie have lasted for a really long time. They were one of the first to show up, and they're still blooming. But they just blanket areas. You can see this kind of dappled sun. They can actually really thrive in this kind of light. But they'll tolerate full sun or partial shade, basically whatever you got. So we're going to let them spread all throughout here. Then of course the common dandelion, we all know these. I actually like to let these flower until they start producing their seed pods. These I will pull, because eventually you're going to get these seeds that spread everywhere. So we'll pop this one off too. I'm just going to take this up to our fire pit, and the next time we have a fire, they can all just get sterilized. Got a couple in here. This one's actually decided to try and keep growing, so we'll re-pull that. This part of the garden was once dominated with those wild violets. Now those geranium have taken over. Here's another one of my favorites. This is Blue Bugle. It's just an extraordinary dark blue, purplish color. They have much more blooms than that Creeping Charlie, but they do look kind of similar in the flower shape. Here's a great example of the differences. The Blue Bugle has much more blooms per cone, but there are fewer blooms. The Creeping Charlie has tons. Every single one of these has flowers on it, but they have much fewer flowers. So I actually prefer these Blue Bugles, I think. They're really lovely. We have those two variations too, which is a nice variety, whereas the Creeping Charlie is pretty much that same light purple color all throughout this hillside. But they've done an excellent job of suppressing weeds that we don't want, but it still looks like we're getting our ferns and our hostas. They're peeking through, so it really makes a great ground cover. Whereas I think this Blue Bugle makes a better border. They don't quite invade as much, so you're not going to be pulling them up as a weed. And I do like to transplant them whenever they're in the wrong spot. But Creeping Charlie, it's so numerous, I just pull it like a weed. Thank you for joining me today in the garden. I hope you watch out for these Fleabane, these Creeping Charlie or ground ivy, the little Rue Anemones here and there, and of course the wild geranium, which have just taken over this hillside. The wild violets are just about done, but they are still around here. They're just not in bloom anymore. So I hope you guys keep an eye out for these beautiful wildflowers in your garden. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.